Hello everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing how to set up and create a proximity trigger script. Essentially what the script does is whenever you come within a trigger zone, it will turn an object on, and whenever you leave that trigger zone, it will turn an object off. Now, I have incorporated some other potential cases, such as the player respawning while being in the proximity, or if they teleport away while in the proximity, maybe like a button to like leave the room, or maybe like it's a little doorway to teleport them out. Maybe they just happen to be in that trigger still, and that could potentially break the script. So by putting those into place, that prevents those issues from happening. So I'm going to do a little bit of a showcase here. So this is my trigger. So when I stand here, this cube will appear. When I go back, it will disappear. Now if I turn this cube on manually, and head on over here, this button here is to simulate a player teleporting away. I'm not actually going to teleport, but it's going to treat it as if I did. So if I click this, you'll see that this disappeared right here. Now I'm going to turn on this cube one more time, and when I click respawn, you'll see that the cube is gone. That kind of protects us from having issues later on. So let's kind of get into how this is all set up and how this works. So we have our little prox trigger here. It has reference to a single game object. You could do this to be other game objects by simply changing it to a game object array. So you simply need to just set up a little trigger. Could be a box collider, a mesh collider, just make sure it's set to is trigger. Now let's take a look at the script. So it's pretty simple, but it also has a little bit of complexity to it. So I'll try my best to explain how this works. First, we have a public game object reference. This is the game object that you want to turn on or off. Next, we have a bool, which is player inside, and we initialize that as false, since the player isn't going to be in there when they join the world. When this object or script in this case is at start, it will make sure that the target game object is set to false. This is entirely optional. If you want your object to be turned on by default, that's perfectly okay. You could just remove that or change it to whatever you like. Next, we have a public override void for on player trigger enter. This basically checks whenever the player is within the trigger zone. And we just check if the player local. This technically isn't necessary from what I remember, but that's okay. We'll set that bool to true, saying, hey, there is a player within this area. And then we set the target game object to active, true. And then we have on the flip side right here, whenever a player exits the trigger, we will turn that bool to false. And then we'll set the state to false. It's right there as well. Next up right here, whenever a player respawns, it will set that bool to false, and it will set this to false as well. And then whenever a player is teleported, again, we'll set it to false and set the game object to false. Now, technically, you don't necessarily need a bool in this instance. You could technically just set it to true or false based on the circumstances. A bool can be useful later on if you're going to be checking for certain conditions. If you have, for example, an if statement like is the player inside? If they are, then do this, for example. In this particular instance, so the way things are set up, you technically don't need a bool. I could be mistaken, but I don't think I am. Okay? Now, with today's video, I'm not gonna just go through how you type this all out, because you can see on screen right here just exactly how it works. There's no particular order as to how you need to do things aside of making sure you have your reference set up and your bool, which again is entirely optional in this case. But you just like in our last video, you just type it out, type your method, just make sure you're doing the exact spelling and everything. And then you simply take your script, drag and drop it onto an empty game object, make sure you reference your game object, and then the way you go. Now, if you're curious about this whole button thing right here, I did discuss this in my previous video. It was about the how to reference a script and while using another script. And essentially what this button does is it references the proximity trigger and then it calls the player teleported method. Now, this is the method you want to call whenever you're having your player teleport out of a room. Again, this is kind of like a safety check, just like this one here. They're not needed per se, but I would strongly recommend keeping them, as there could be situations where a player may respawn while being in proximity of something, and then it would get left on, and that's not the what you want. Same thing with the teleport. Maybe a player gets teleported by some other means. So let's say you have a door teleport, that you would obviously have the logic for the teleport and make sure that you reference the proximity trigger script and then call this method in there. And again, if you're not sure how to do that, please watch my previous video. It discusses in detail of how you can set that up and make it work. Okay? Now, if you have any questions or if you would prefer me to go into this with much more detail, let me know in the comments. I'm trying to keep the video shorter with less rambling. Try my damn best. But thanks for watching this video. I hope you have a wonderful day and goodbye.